Top boxing news.
Ow! Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from Mike Coppinger via his sources. Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte is being eyed for April at the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, Wales. And if I'm being honest, I'll be surprised if the fight actually happens, because I can see several different scenarios where the fight doesn't happen. I will admit, I didn't expect BT Sport to win this purse bid.
The purse bid was imposed upon them because Dillian Whyte wouldn't take their initial offer.
He didn't want to take the $5 million up front against 25%, the $5 million that has now turned into $7.4 million with a $4.1 million bonus should he win the match. I mean, he is getting more money based on
the pot being a bigger pot than it was before.
Though I maintain a healthy level of skepticism, I'm not sure that this fight will come off. I can see several different scenarios on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the coin, to where a lot can happen between now and April. Tyson Fury reacted to the news. Frank Warren winning the purse bid for his next fight versus Dillian Whyte, staging it in the United Kingdom. He said, "I'm coming home, baby. Get ready for the biggest British dust-up since Lennox Lewis versus Frank Bruno. History in the making." And it's funny that Tyson Fury should relegate this fight to being in that scope, that spectrum, the biggest all-British matchup since Lewis versus Bruno.
Also, now you guys think it's a big fight.
Well, if it's such a big fight, the biggest all-British boxing match since Lewis versus Bruno, if that's the case, why'd you guys only offer Dillian Whyte $5 million?
You weren't acting like this is the biggest all-British fight since Lewis versus Bruno.
That's not how you priced the fight initially. That's not how you priced the fight before.
Tyson Fury thinks this is such a big fight. If it's such a big fight, then why was he trying to get out of it?
Based on what information is out there, Tyson Fury was trying to get out of this fight, this Dillian Whyte fight. And it wasn't so he could unify titles with Alexander Usyk, per Eddie Hearn, per Egis Klimas, hell, per his own father. Tyson Fury walked away from that Usyk situation.
The story is he wanted to fight a handpick in March.
And we've talked about that here on the channel, so now all of a sudden he's got all this enthusiasm for a Dillian Whyte fight. And I've maintained throughout that this is
the biggest fight you can do in the UK right now.
The only other fight that you could do in the UK, in the United Kingdom, that would be bigger than this fight between Dillian Whyte and Tyson Fury. The only other fight you could do that would be bigger than this one would be an Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight. But Anthony Joshua, he's got to make it past Alexander Usyk, and it's not a foregone conclusion that he does. Thus, this is the biggest fight you can do in the UK right now.
But you never would have known that, how the Tyson Fury people priced the fight.
Go back and watch those videos from a few weeks ago regarding this subject. Go back and watch them. I've been telling you the whole time. Right now, this is the biggest fight you can do in the UK. This is the biggest fight you can do in the United Kingdom, and you would have never known that based on the kind of offer, the initial offer they made to Dillian Whyte, based on how they were talking about him and treating the entire situation. You never would have known that this is the biggest fight you can do in the UK right now, based on how Tyson Fury's people were treating the situation. And the fight,
WBC President Mauricio Suleiman called this purse bid the biggest purse bid in the history of purse bids.
Tyson Fury is now calling this fight the biggest all-British dust-up since Lewis versus Bruno.
They've known the whole time that this is a major fight in the United Kingdom.
But they weren't committed to it. And we've talked about that. We've talked about why. You think about the Dillian Whyte side of things, and you have to wonder if Dillian Whyte is happy with how the cookie crumbled. In my heart of hearts, I feel like Dillian Whyte would have preferred had Eddie Hearn and Matchroom won the purse bid, had they been the ones that won the purse bid, and they'd be the ones hosting the fight. I think in his heart of hearts, Dillian Whyte would have preferred that this fight happen on the Matchroom side of things. As it stands, if it happens, it's going to happen on the BT Queensbury Promotions side of things. I wonder how he feels about that. I wonder if he's satisfied with the kind of money he's supposed to be getting. It's certainly more than what he was offered. $5 million up front.
Well, that's $7.4 million now with a $4.1 million bonus if he wins.
Though in order for him to win, the fight has to actually take place. And I told you, I have my reservations about that. On the Tyson Fury side of things, something could go wrong. He could get injured. He could contract COVID. These are very unstable times. But the same applies to Dillian Whyte. What if Dillian isn't satisfied with how the cookie crumbled? Dillian Whyte, who is uncharacteristically quiet on the heels of this purse bid, this victory, quote-unquote, I should say, for Frank Warren and Top Rank.
Maybe by the time this video is uploaded, he'll break his silence.
Maybe, I don't know. We haven't heard much from Dillian or Eddie since that news broke. I'll tell you this much. We've crossed into the point of no return to where the boxing community at large, the boxing public, won't forgive either one of these guys should one of these guys walk away. That applies to Dillian Whyte. It's now a question of how bad do you want that title shot? How bad do you want Tyson Fury? Bad enough that you're willing to fight under the Queensberry Promotions banner in enemy territory, hostile territory, on Tyson Fury's side of things. How bad do you want it? Because if you walk away, the boxing community at large, they may not forgive you for it. And Dillian walking away is just as possible as Tyson Fury walking away.
What if underneath it all he doesn't like the situation?
What if this wasn't the outcome that he was anticipating, this guaranteed dollar amount and who would be hosting the fight? What if he was anticipating that Matchroom would win the bid the same way many of us thought that Matchroom would win the bid? What then? For what it's worth, Dillian Whyte went to purse bids because he wanted more money, and he got it. He's supposed to get more than just the 5 they offered him initially. The $5 million up front they offered him at first. He's now supposed to be getting 7.4 and an additional 4.1 million if he pulls this thing off, if he wins. Though, does he like his chances over there at Queensberry? Because that's who's doing the fight. That's where it's going to be.
Does he like his chances enough that he goes through with this thing?
That is a legitimate question, and one thing's for sure. He's past the point of no return. If he walks away now, the boxing community that has been holding him up and supporting him in this endeavor to finally get a shot at the green belt, they'll turn against him.
You gotta be willing to gamble now.
See it through. Let it play out. And if Tyson Fury intends to bail on you, let him bail on you.
Let everybody see him do it.
Let everybody watch. Neither one of these two guys can afford to walk away from this thing without their stock taking a hit, a critical hit.
And I'm not convinced this fight is going to actually happen.
Something could go wrong. Someone could pull out. It's just a question of who's it going to be? And just in keeping with the theme of all things heavyweight in regard to this situation between all of these guys, Old Fish Ice Frank Warren said, in the end, some of the financial demands made to step aside were impossible to accommodate. Joshua priced himself out. That was the straw that broke the camel's back as far as Tyson was concerned.
What straw that broke what camel's back? You're not paying for any of this.
That entire proposition for Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte to step aside wasn't coming on Tyson Fury's dime, Frank Warren's dime, or Bob Arum's. It was by way of the Saudis that the step-aside agreement would be financed. So why would Tyson Fury lose his cool?
You're not paying for any of this.
Well, of course, Frank Warren's version of the story is going to sound a lot different than what you hear from Eddie Hearn and what you hear from Egis Klimas, because as far as Eddie and Egis are concerned, it's Tyson Fury that screwed the pooch. It's Tyson Fury that walked away from the Usyk fight, whereas according to Frank, Anthony Joshua wanted too much money to step aside, which is just another way of saying he didn't want to step aside. He wanted that Usyk rematch, where Tyson Fury's fanboys would have you believe that he didn't want no parts of Usyk in a second fight. He didn't want no parts of the rematch because he's a coward. According to Frank.
Why is he asking for so much money to step aside?
The problem here is that this is a common sense argument, and many of Tyson Fury's fanboys lack just that. Common sense, basic common sense. Of course, Anthony Joshua is going to want a hefty step-aside fee in order to waive his right to a rematch, a contracted rematch, because he wants the rematch, which is the opposite of what they've been telling you.
Oh no, they've been making videos on their little channels about how Anthony Joshua's going to duck the rematch.
Tweeting their tweets on Twitter about how Anthony Joshua is attempting to circumvent Alexander Usyk in a second fight.
On their burner accounts on Twitter.
You see, those guys, they can't make up their minds what they really want. If Anthony Joshua were to step aside, they'd criticize him for it. But when he doesn't step aside, they claim he's blocking the undisputed title fight, and they'll criticize him for that. He's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't.
Not that it matters, because according to Egis Klimas, Fury stalled the fight.
In his own words, Tyson Fury, was the one holding up that wagon, and talk, as it were, Tyson Fury, being such a big fan of talking.
Big talker.
Talk is cheap. So let's go with Frank's version of the story. Anthony Joshua wanted a lot of money to step aside. Well, what the fuck were you expecting?
Let's put every version of this story together.
According to Frank Warren, Anthony Joshua wanted a lot of money to step aside, which was expected, and according to Eddie Hearn and Egis Klimas, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because what Tyson Fury wanted to do was go into a tune-up fight in March, not straight into an Alexander Usyk undisputed title fight.
And that's why Egis Klimas blamed Tyson Fury for holding up the wagon.
He blamed him for holding up the fight, not Anthony Joshua. So what we're looking at here is a bit of spin from Old Fish Eyes, i.e., damage control, because it's quite damaging to Tyson Fury.
Wasn't trying to fight Usyk next anyway.
In other news, per a tweet from Michael Benson, WBO have now ordered Demetrius Andrade versus Zach Parker for their WBO interim super middleweight belt. Parties have 10 days, now 9, to agree to a deal, or purse bids will be ordered. Winner would likely be the next WBO mandatory challenger for Canelo Alvarez. Could we see Eddie Hearn and Old Fish Eyes Frank Warren in another purse bid situation when it comes to this fight? I don't think so. I don't think they're as invested in the career of Zach Parker as invested as they are in the career of Tyson Fury. It is a different kettle of fish. Zach Parker's not a champion.
I don't expect a bidding war to ensue, but you never know.
I'm not expecting a bidding war to ensue for a guy who's not a marquee fighter in the United Kingdom against another guy who's not really a marquee fighter in the United States. I don't see that.
Hey, you never know.
You never do. A lot of people have already made up their minds as far as how they feel about Demetrius Andrade moving up in weight. The timing of the move, they feel he's ducking Janibek Alimkhanuly. And I understand these people, I do. I get where they're coming from.
You know that Janibek is still calling this guy out?
This fight means more to Janibek than it means to Demetrius. That much is obvious. Janibek Alimkhanuly, he needs names. He needs names like the name of Demetrius Andrade. Whereas for Demetrius, he doesn't get all that much out of defending his WBO title, his middleweight title in the middleweight division against Janibek, because Janibek is an unbeaten up-and-comer, promising.
But he ain't even got the name value of a Jaime Munguia.
So if your aim is to move up in weight, potentially become a 3-division champion, with or without a Canelo Alvarez fight, by way of a Zach Parker.
By way of facing Zach Parker for interim status.
It's very hard for me to lambast Demetrius Andrade for skipping out on Janibek Alimkhanuly, and make no mistake, that's what he's doing. If it were Jaime Munguia that he were ordered to fight, you have to ask yourself, would he still move up in weight? You know the answer.
You know what it is.
With that, it's hard for me to lambast him for skipping out on Janibek when so many middleweights have skipped out on him, because Gennady Golovkin sat out all of last year, and he had the option to face Demetrius Andrade if he wanted to, but he didn't want to, and that's the truth. He could have made good money with that fight. DAZN would have paid the piper, and you guys know that.
So Gennady gets to sit out for a whole year.
Ryota Murata plays it safer than Gennady Golovkin. He sits out for 2 whole years, and it's Demetrius Andrade we have to lambast.
Middleweight division just ain't what it used to be.
It isn't. Demetrius Andrade versus Jermall Charlo has been relegated to a fantasy fight, a fucking fantasy, between 2 unbeaten contemporaries. 2 unbeaten champions in today's middleweight division has been relegated to a fantasy fight. A fucking fantasy, because in reality, it'll never see the light of day.
And the opportunities were there.
And none of this is going to make Demetrius Andrade's resume any more robust. None of this is going to add names to it. Though I look at the state of the middleweight division, today's middleweight division, and I ask myself if Demetrius Andrade is really the problem. And the way I see it, he's not the problem. Those 3 guys are the problem. So he's supposed to prioritize a Janibek Alimkhanuly fight where those guys don't prioritize a fight with him.
I'm supposed to lose my mind that he ain't fighting a mandatory when you got champions that won't fight with champions.
They won't fight with him. Demetrius Andrade not fighting Janibek Alimkhanuly is the least of the middleweight division's worries. That division has cooled off.
How long has Jaime Munguia been playing it safe?
You know, he had a fun little fight with Gabriel Rosado his last time out last year. And
was it right?
At this point, for a guy who used to be a champion with title defenses in the junior middleweight division, you would have thought that he'd have fought someone with a pulse, somebody with a pulse by now, having been at middleweight as long as Jaime has been at middleweight. I mean, I look at the state of that weight class, the kind of fights that are happening and the kind that aren't. I look at that and I ask myself, how important is it really that Demetrius fights someone like Janibek when there are so many guys who keep skirting around him, Jaime Munguia included?
What makes you so mad that Demetrius is skipping out on Janibek, but what about all the guys that are skipping out on him?
It's not one way, it's a 2-way street. Demetrius is skipping out on Janibek the same way that so many fighters are skipping out on him. Do you keep the same energy for them that you keep for Demetrius Andrade?
Do you keep the same energy for them that you keep for him?
There is no way for me, from where I'm sitting, given the state of this division, this weight class, there's no way for me to look at this objectively and lose my mind that Demetrius is making a decision to leave the middleweight division, even if it's at a time when he's being ordered to fight Janibek Alimkhanuly, because Janibek, I'm sorry to tell you this, that ain't a big fight. It's a good fight, it's a decent fight for the hardcore boxing fans who even know who Janibek Alimkhanuly is, but make no mistake, It's not a big marquee fight. It's not the kind of fight you really want to see Demetrius Andrade in. At this point, he should be in a Charlo fight, but Charlo don't want to fight him. You'd think that because he's on the same side of the street as Gennady Golovkin, that would be an easy fight to make. But it isn't. And Ryota Murata, he hasn't fought anybody in 2 years.
Jaime Munguia, he was a junior middleweight champion, the same as Demetrius.
The same as Jamal Charlo and the same as Canelo Alvarez before him. Yet Jaime Munguia is happy to stay on the outskirts, out of the world title picture.
Listen, yeah, Demetrius is skipping out on Janibek.
But when in Rome, he's skipping out on that fight. You've got guys in this same division, this same weight class, with belts, skipping out on bigger fights than that one.
Middleweight fucking sucks, man.
It sucks. And because it sucks, I don't blame Demetrius Andrade for moving up. I can't. If he were to stay there, defend his title against Janibek Alimkhanuly, say he beats that guy, what does he do after that?
The guys that ain't been fighting him still ain't gonna fight him.
And even if I think that Janibek is a more interesting fight with a more pleasing aesthetic than a Zach Parker fight at super middleweight, even if I think that, it's no bigger a fight than a Zach Parker fight. It might be a slightly better fight, somewhat better, but it's not a bigger fight. Demetrius, at this point, he needs big fights. Bigger fights than what he's doing. He's closer to the big fights at 168 than he is at 160 because he's been at 160 for years and nothing's happened.
You gotta get the fuck out of that place.
I'm not trying to get any of you out there to agree with me. I can only tell you what I think, and if you want to know what I think and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, there's no reason to stay at middleweight. And the Janibek Alimkhanuly fight is not reason enough to put a Zach Parker fight on hold because that Zach Parker fight could lead you to a belt. Whereas Janibek, what do you get out of that?
Oh, you get to keep the same belt you already had.
The one at middleweight that nobody seemed to want to take from you. Nobody except Janibek, that is.
People are either gonna sympathize or they're not, but me, I sympathize.